Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink. It is time for some Path of Exile 2 discussion. Today we're going to be talking about Vaal Orbs. Now this is a currency item that has a number of really obvious applications, but also is one of the most RNG heavy items in all of Path of Exile 2. They're better than they were in Path of Exile 1, and as a result you're going to be more likely to want to use them. There are absolutely positively going to be times that using a Vaal Orb will be a terrible idea. We can go through that in this video. This is one of those things where more information kept coming out as I was writing this, so it took quite a while to get this one out because we kept finding more and more corner cases. Working out how to explain the Masks of the Stitched Demon that existed in Trade League, as well as the Fireflowers that existed in Trade League, that took quite a while. So the Vaal Orb is an extremely high risk crafting orb, with RNG outcomes that can be very good, but can also be awful. This can absolutely ruin the items that you use them on, especially on rare items. More on that in a bit. But the first rule of Vaal Orbs is you don't Vaal anything you can't replace. If you've got two weapons, one of them's like 2% better than the other one, then the weaker one is a perfectly fine substitute, so it's fine to Vaal a better one. Or you can Vaal a weaker one if you prefer. In either case, it's not going to be a terrible day if RNG decides to frown on you, and the game decides not to respect your courage in Vaaling that item. It's important to remember that after you Vaal Orb an item, that is the end of the line for modifying that item. That means that you can't apply further currency items to it. If you don't have quality on it, you're never going to get quality on it. You don't have annoyance on it, you're never going to get annoyance on it. You don't have rune sockets, you're never going to get rune sockets. You didn't exalt the item so it only had 4 or 5 mods before you Vaaled it. Well, it's stuck with 4 or 5 mods. It'll forever be worse than it would have been if you'd invested additionally in it before applying that Vaal Orb. Also, not all uses of Vaal Orbs are equal. On unique items and Waystones, the upsides are more likely, and also in some cases more powerful, and as a result these are the best things to Vaal. But we will go through all of the other sorts of things you might choose to use them on as well, or at least the vast majority. There's always 1 or 2 corner cases that you don't think of. For example, for a brief period in Path of Exile 1, it was possible to Vaal an offering to the goddess, which is not something that I would ever have thought to apply a Vaal Orb to myself. It didn't actually do anything, but you could apply a Vaal Orb to it. Normally speaking, there are 4 different outcomes, or 4 main categories of outcomes you'll get with a Vaal Orb. One of them will do nothing other than apply the corrupted tag. The other 3 will vary depending upon the type of item that you are corrupting at the time. Often one of the outcomes changes the modifiers on the item in a certain way, and that's going to vary with different categories of items. One will add a mod, and one will add a socket. But more on these later. There are lots of exceptions to these rules. Now there is also an item called an Omen of Corruption. So what does the Omen of Corruption do? I mentioned there's a 1 in 4 chance, 25%, that your Vaal Orb will do nothing at all. All the Omen of Corruption is believed to do is remove that outcome from the list of possible things that you can roll. Now there's a bunch of turbulence in the Trade League economy, and at the time I was recording this video, 100 exalts was a reasonable price for these omens. Now it's more like 115. That's probably going to continue to change, but that's just because the Exalted Orb is in freefall at the moment. I'll do another video on that soon because it's something that needs to be discussed. All that said, the Omen of Corruption is pretty stable around 55% of the value of a Divine Orb. So 3 times the price of an Omen of Corruption is about 1.65 Divines. It becomes more important to either not use these or to use them as the difference between 1.65 Divines becomes bigger. So if you're Vaaling something that's 20 Divines or so, like an Ingenuity Belt, you absolutely always positively must use the Omen of Corruption. If you're Vaaling something that's super cheap, like a Life Sprig, then you absolutely never use an Omen of Corruption. And if it's close by, it doesn't really matter that much what you decide. The rationale behind this 3 times threshold is because if you were to take 4 different items and apply Vaal Orbs, statistically 25% of them are going to get that do nothing result, and then the other 75% are just going to get a spectrum of the other possible outcomes on the item. If you were to use 3 Omens of Corruption and 3 copies of that item, then you would essentially get the same 75%, the same good outcomes, also the same catastrophic ones, but the ones that do nothing are not going to be repeated. So essentially 3 of these Omens of Corruption are sacrificing themselves to protect one of the items that you would have otherwise Vaaled that would have gone no changes. That's the rationale there, and that's my advice for using the Omens at current market conditions, but of course, that could change. By the time you're watching this, who knows, maybe the Omen of Corruption's 1.7 Divines, and you don't want to use them on anything under about 5 div. Or maybe the Omen of Corruption's become cheaper, and you can use them much more frivolously. Or if you're playing in solo self-found, instead of considering the value, consider how hard they are to replace. Note that these are pretty rare. Omens of Corruption only come from doing ritual content, including fighting the King in the Mist, and they are quite rare. There's a lot of common omens, this is not one of them. So keep that in mind. You're not going to have an easy time replacing 3 of these if you're playing in SSF, but it's still going to be easier to replace them than it is to replace some really rare unique you might have happened to get. So let's start out by talking about unique items. This is a real fire flower that you can see here. Have a look at that modifier +6 to the level of all fire skills. Yes, this is real. This rolls randomly from 1 to 4 normally, but the Vaal Orb has allowed it to be pushed beyond normal limits. On top of that, the Vaal Orb has only pushed it up to 5, but then the quality, the 20% fire quality on this item, has further pushed it up to 6. This is an incredibly powerful item, and we're going to talk more about how you would go about creating this fire flower right near the end of this video. Fun fact, based on our best available model of how Vaal Orbs work, it is 1 in 72 that you'll hit this particular roll on a fire flower. Now, only on unique items, Vaal Orbs can replicate the effect of a Divine Orb, but with an unusual twist. Some players term this Krangledivining the item, and this is a combination of Krangled, which was Path of Exile 1 slang for a corrupted item following a meme years ago, and Divining the item, just a reference to the Divine Orb. Modifiers can then break the limits that are normally allowed by up to 22%. This can be extremely strong on certain uniques, especially on unique items where the best modifier can roll a 3 or 4, and it's extremely sensitive to the particular roll that you get, just like Fireflower here. It is still, however, very much an R&D endeavor to get one of these perfect or beyond perfect Fireflowers. Now, there are 4 possible outcomes when you Vaal a unique item. The first one is to do nothing. Once more, an Omen of Corruption can remove this, and you should only do this on items that are worth 3 times or more the price of an Omen of Corruption. It can add a new modifier to the item. This won't change the other mods on it, it will add an enchantment to it, and these enchantments can be very good. They're particularly good in the helmet and the amulet slot. In the helmet slot, 20 to 30 spirit is one outcome you can get, +1 minion gem level is another outcome. In the amulet slot, there's also lots of really good things that can come up there as well. Now, if the item is capable of having rune sockets, then the item can have a new rune socket added, and this exceeds the normal limits as to the number of rune sockets items can have. So chess pieces can normally only have 0, 1, or 2 rune sockets, but even if it's got 2 already, this will push it up to 3. There are also some unique items, such as Moroya Invictus, that have an unusually high number of rune sockets, and again, this will allow Moroya Invictus to be pushed up to 5, where it would normally be allowed to have only 4. And the 4th possible outcome is that the item ends up being Krangledivined. Let's talk about what Krangledivining does. This only applies to unique items. And this was one of those things that was very hard to crack exactly the formula grinding gear games are using, but I'm pretty confident that we've got it right now. So firstly, it applies effect that is similar to that of a Divine Orb to the item. Randomizes the value of all the mods that are on it. Then after that, for each modifier that's on the item, the game picks a number at random from 78% up to 122%. This will be a whole percentage, so it might pick 87%, it's not going to pick 87.113%. Now we know that all 45 exact percentages are possible, and we also believe them to be equally weighted, but we're not 100% certain on that. Once this has happened, Krangledivining then multiplies the numerical value of the modifier by the chosen number, and then a new random number from 78 to 122% is picked for each other modifier on the item. Now, Path of Exile 1 and Path of Exile 2 both have a rule where everything rounds down. Krangledivining explicitly breaks this, and the rounding on Krangledivined items is to the nearest number, not to the lower number. So if you have something that's 4.48, this is going to round down to 4 because 4 is the closest whole number. But if it was 4.52, it's going to round up to 5 instead, because 5 is the nearest number. Now, there are some instances where items will have a set number of decimal points instead. The unique chess piece Temporalis has a mod that is measured in 1/100th of a second. So it displays the player, reduces cooldowns on your skills by 3.90 seconds, but that's actually tracked as 390 times 10 milliseconds. And so the rounding on that is to the nearest 1/100th of a second. You'll have to check out what items exist on trade, even if you play in solo self-found, to work out how the rounding works on a particular item. Finally, if the item has a multiplicative quality bonus, and this mostly comes up with amulets and with rings, with the quality bonuses that come from Catalyst, but it also does come up from a couple of other places, then this applies now. And the rounding on these is rounding down. It's normal Path of Exile 1 and Path of Exile 2 rounding. So yeah, all of the mathematics rules that are normal in Path of Exile 1 and Path of Exile 2, even though they happen behind the scenes, you might not notice them, all of that gets broken by the Krangledivining process. There's also a couple of really weird corner cases. One thing that caused a delay in this video was me discovering a helmet that made me question everything that I've said so far about how Krangledivining works, and that was Mask of the Stitched Demon. This has a line of text on it that reads 0.05 life per second in part. Now that actually internally is 3 life per minute. That's the way that Path of Exile 2 records that stat, and that's why when it rounds to 4 or to 2, it ends up then redisplaying it as 0.03 or 0.07. That one definitely had us confused for a little while, and there might be a couple of other weird corner cases like that. For instance, there are two really weird things with controlled metamorphosis. One of them is that the only effects passive in X ring can actually disappear. Now this one can be explained. That's because it was tracked, it may or may not still be tracked this way, but it was tracked with a number from 1 to 8. And if it happened to Krangledivining to a 9 or a 10, then that would cause it to disappear. But additionally, this has some negative numbers on it, and we're not exactly certain how rounding works with negative numbers. We have found a couple of counterexamples to the way we think it works, but they only apply to controlled metamorphosis. So just keep in mind, this one might Krangledivining a little bit weirder than we're expecting. But for all the important things, like Fireflower, everything works like we've outlined it so far. And the biggest hint to working out how all of this worked was a unique chess piece, Calm's Heart, and having a look at all the ones that existed on trade that didn't have exactly 1000 as their life roll. And it was always multiples of 10. There are a few other items as well that help with this. Queen of the Forest in particular comes to mind. This gave us evidence that 78% and 122% were limits. And then after that, we're able to work out how rounding worked through investigating Fireflowers that are available on trade, and also a lot of life sprigs that were sacrificed to the cause to bring you this information by good old Nerdy Joe. He Vaaled an enormous number of those, and we'd already worked out how rare do we expect the +4s to be. They'll be very rare, they were very rare, and that gave us a further confirmation we were expecting. So that's unique items. You'll notice that Krangledivining is a really strong outcome, and then on top of that, there's a whole lot of other things that can happen. What about rare items though? See this maul? It has 3 rune sockets on it. That's one potential Vaal outcome that you can get. What Vaal Orbs do to rares vary a moderate amount by the item type. It's worth noting that where I'm talking about rare items here, this also mostly applies to magic items as well. So there's 4 possible outcomes in most inventory slots. Firstly, you can do nothing, and again, an Omen of Corruption can remove this from the mod pool. You can add a new mod, aka an enchantment. You can add a new rune socket if the item is capable of having them, and this works a bit differently on caster weapons, we'll get to that in a sec. This option does nothing on rings, belts, and amulets, but unlike the actual official do nothing, this isn't removed from the pool of options on a ring, a belt, or an amulet by an Omen of Corruption. Then finally, we have something that's a little bit new and that replaces the possibility of Krangledivining the item. On a rare item, instead of Krangledivining the item, it'll apply the effects of 1, 2, or 3 Chaos Orbs to the item. Now this is generally a really negative outcome. Broadly speaking, this will take a coherent, well-rolled rare item and it'll turn it into an incoherent mess with a mixture of high and low tier mods, and basically no better than something rubbish that you picked up off the ground. Broadly speaking, this is going to destroy the item. This can apply to magic items, even though Chaos Orbs can't. It just does the same effect a Chaos Orb would. Remove a mod, add a mod, remove a mod, add a mod. And you should notice that this is quite a bit worse than the potential outcomes you get when you apply Vaal Orbs to unique items. Caster wands are a little bit different, as we mentioned. This actually applies to unique caster wands as well. They also can't have sockets. Wands, scepters, caster staves. All of these provide you with a skill that you can use from them, and they can't get rune sockets. What they can get though, is quality that transfers on to the skill that they provide you. This normally comes from Arcanist Etchers, but it can also come from a Vaal Orb. So quality on these weapons, they apply to the gem that is allowed to be cast by the wand. Vaal Orbs that would add a rune socket, instead add or remove a random amount of quality, and this amount of quality is up to 10. Now caster weapon quality is hard capped at both 0 and 23%. So if you've got 17% caster weapon quality on your wand, you apply a Vaal Orb, the game rolls, hey, you get +8 quality on that, then instead of going to 25%, you go to the hard cap instead of 23%. If you've got 2%, then the game rolls, hey, guess what? You're losing 6% quality on that. Then you don't go to -4, you just go to 0 instead. Vaal Orbs do break a lot of rules in the game, but this is one that they don't break. What about Vaaling gems? There are two really good use cases for this. Gems in general corrupt extremely well, but it's also highly RNG. The best use case for corrupting gems is arguably when you're very, very wealthy and you can afford to sacrifice a lot of perfect jeweler's orbs, chasing the very best possible gems in the game. These will be gems that are level 21, with 5 support gem slots, and with 20% quality on them. Now there's a 25% chance when you corrupt a gem to get no change, except that the gem becomes corrupted. Now, everything we discussed about the Omen of Corruption applies here, and if you have used a perfect jeweler's orb on your gem, then you probably are going to want to also use an Omen of Corruption here, because a perfect jeweler's orb is usually more than triple the value of an Omen of Corruption on its own. The second outcome is that you can permanently add a support gem socket. Now this seems to be 1 in 8. This is very useful early in Trade League, because greater jeweler's orbs are rare, but lesser jeweler's orbs are quite common. So you can farm up a lesser jeweler's orb yourself, then you can apply a Vaal Orb to your gem, and you've got a 1 in 8 chance of essentially getting the benefits of a greater jeweler's orb, although later on you are going to want to replace that gem with a clean one, but that can wait until you've got a perfect jeweler's orb. This outcome is wasted if you've already applied a perfect jeweler's orb to the gem in question. There's a 12.5% chance to get the opposite of this, to permanently remove a support gem socket from the gem. At this point, you may as well just throw that gem in the trash because it is complete and utter rubbish at this point. The next option is the best of them. Permanently enchant the gem with +1 to gem level. At the time I'm recording this video, and I'm not sure if this is intended, this is the sort of thing that might change in the future, but at the time I'm recording this video, if you corrupt a gem, you can still level that gem up later through the uncut skill gem system. So if you've got a level 17 gem and it has this +1 gem level enchant on it, and then later you drop a perfect level 20 uncut skill gem, then you can push it up to level 21 that way. You can also enchant the gem with -1 gem level. This is at least as destructive as the outcome that removes the support gem socket. Basically, that gem is gone at this point. And finally, there is a 25% chance of nudging the quality by up to 10%. This is just like on caster weapons. It'll nudge it by up to 10% at random, cannot drop quality below 0, cannot raise it above 23%. Now there is only one pathway possible to the best gems in the game. These are level 21, 5 supports, and 20 quality. Here, you want to start out by applying 4 Gem Cutters Prisms and a lesser, greater, and perfect jeweler's orb to the gem. Then you've got that 1 in 8 chance, or 1 in 6 with an Omen of Corruption, which is usually going to be the way to go, to then get that enchant for +1 to gem level. At the time I'm recording this video, you don't need to do this on a level 20 gem. You can do this on a level 15 gem, and then only if you get the +1 enchant, then you can level that up to 20 through the use of a level 20 uncut skill gem. It wouldn't shock me if that changes in the future, but it also wouldn't shock me if it's working as intended. I don't know. The next thing you might want to consider corrupting is Waystones. In fact, if you haven't been corrupting your Waystones, this is one of the best things to use Vaal Orbs on early on. My Path of Exile 1 brain still calls Waystones maps. Vaaling Waystones is really strong. There's only one genuinely bad outcome, and even then, you're not really losing all that much. You're just losing a moderately well-rolled tier 15 map. So, 25% chance that there is no change except that the Waystone becomes corrupted. Again, you've got the option of using an Omen of Corruption, but you should never do it on a Waystone. There's a 25% chance that you'll adjust the Waystone's tier up or down by 1. So it seems to be 12.5% to go +1, 12.5% to go -1. Now it has been my experience that at least once or twice I have seen this happen without the mods changing, but I know the mods can also get changed as well. And since patch 0.1.1, I believe this is now the only way to get tier 16 Waystones, whereas it used to be the main way that you got them. -1 tier is the only truly terrible outcome. Then we have a 12.5% chance to remove all prefixes from the Waystone, and then add a suffix for each prefix removed. This is allowed to break the normal limits of 1 suffix or 3 suffix for magic and rare items respectively. Now these Waystones will be super dangerous because the suffixes are the difficulty mods, and they're also the ones that govern your Waystone percentage drop chance. However, the thing that makes this really solid is that these suffixes also increase your chances to get an Arbiter key, or to get more than one key to the Arbiter if you're doing a Citadel map. And it's those Citadels that end up being the real jackpot here. If your character is monstrously powerful, then these maps are going to be absolutely phenomenal, especially if they've got 6 mods, so 6 suffixes. They're going to be incredibly good when it comes to running those Citadel maps, because you're then going to get multiple Arbiter keys every time. The other possibility that's very related is the exact reverse process. all suffixes are removed from the Waystone, making it easier, and you get a prefix for each suffix that was removed in this way, and this can break the limits that would normally be placed on the number of prefixes you can have on an item. This is also very, very strong, but it's very, very strong in a different way, because the prefixes, they govern normal loot. You don't want to run these maps when you're in a situation where map sustain is a bit tight, but when it's not, these are going to drop more of everything else in the game except for maps. And finally, you have a 25% chance to just throw a bunch of extra mods onto your map. This will keep the mods that are already there, but it'll add more of them. My experience, this seems to usually be 4. I'm just not confident that it's always exactly 4. And this will make the juiciest Waystones that can exist. Basically, all of these outcomes, except -1 tier, are at least useful sometimes. What about jewels? Jewels are something that gets smaller effects from corruption. They're both smaller negative and smaller positive outcomes. Vaal enchantments they can get, they're usually pretty minor. You're not going to get +1 to all fire skills or +20 to 30 spirit on one, but you can get little things that help a little bit. There's a 25% chance on jewels to get no change, a 25% chance to apply an effect similar to that of a Chaos Orb on the item once, twice, or 3 times. Again, this can apply to magic items as well. Generally speaking, this is going to ruin your jewel. This is going to take a cohesive whole and turn it into an incoherent mess of mods that don't synergize with each other very well. Now, if the jewel happens to be unique, this particular outcome appears to do absolutely nothing. There is also a 25% chance to get a Vaal enchantment on the item, and there's a 25% chance to, at random, either add or remove a modifier from the jewel. Now, this allows you to exceed the normal limits of 4 mods that you can have on a jewel, 2 prefixes and 2 suffixes, and so this is something that can be very, very strong. If, however, your jewel happens to be unique, this last outcome appears to Krangledivining the item instead. So go have a look at the unique item discussion that took place earlier for all about Krangledivining. I'll try to remember to put a timestamp down in the description below. Flasks and Charms are simpler. There is no 25% chance to do A, 25% chance to do B, 25% chance to do C, 25% chance to do D. Instead, you always get a quality nudge, just like on caster weapons, just like the times that quality nudges come up on gems. This, again, cannot exceed 23% quality, and it cannot go below 0% quality. Now, a very important thing to note here is that there's some rounding issues that make this less powerful than it might sound. Thawing Charm comes to mind, 3-second base duration. What do you get if you have 20% quality on a Thawing Charm? Well, you get 3.6 seconds. What do you get if you have 23%? You might be thinking, oh, that's 3.69 seconds, isn't it? But you actually get 3.6 seconds because the game rounds that down. 3.69 is considered to be 36.9, rounded down to 36 or 3.6 seconds. The rounding is extremely not in your favor, and this means that quality on charms is weaker than you might otherwise consider it to be. That said, there's a number of modifiers you can get on the charm that might increase its duration, and if you've got one of those present, then all of these numbers are going to be different. So let's talk about the odds to get the perfect fire flowers that we were talking about before. You want a +6 fire flower. The first thing you need is to Krangledivining the item. It's 1 in 3 to Krangledivining if you use the Omen of Corruption. It's 1 in 4 if you don't. But currently the Omen is just simply too precious to use on a middling rarity amulet like Fire Flower. So here it's 1 in 4. We're not going to be using the Omens. Secondly, your Krangledivining outcome needs to roll +4 on the Divine Orb, on that plus to the level of all fire skills. This is another 1 in 4. It's a second layered 1 in 4. So we're looking at 1 in 16 so far. Next, there's that random scaling factor from 78% to 122%. We need to get 113% or higher. If we get 112%, it's 4.48, it's going to round down. If we get 113%, 4.52, it's going to round up to 5. So there's 10 good outcomes out of 45 possible, which is 2 in 9. Multiplying all of this together, the odds to get a +5 Fire Flower, and that's before the quality kicks in, that's going to be 1 in 72 Fire Flower corruptions on average. But then, multiplicative quality, which is Zoph's Catalyst, the one that increases the magnitude of fire modifiers, this applies last. Now, if your amulet would have been +4, this is only going to take it up to 4.8, which is not high enough to get over to 5, and remember, it's already been rounded. The reason that we know that this multiplicative quality applies last is because there are some fire flowers on trade that have the 20% quality fire modifiers, but that only have 93 fire damage taken when you ignite an enemy. Now, the only way that we could explain this is that the Krangledivining roll was 78, and then this got scaled up by 20%, which is +15.6. But that applied last and then was rounded down, so you ended up with 93. If, on the other hand, you started with the fire quality modifier, then you'd start at 120 fire damage taken when you ignite an enemy, because that's always 100 before it's scaled, and then that would be scaled by a factor of 78%, but that would round up to 94 in that case, because it would be 93.6. Taking all of this together, we're able to conclude that the quality aspect was applied absolutely last. If you're at +5 without this level of quality, then you become at +6 with it. But if you're only at +4 without it, then you're going to be at 4.8, which is going to fall short because it's normal Path of Exile rounding here, it drops back to 4. Ultimately, the way that the rounding works in Path of Exile 2, if you have 20% fire quality, you're only going to get 1, 2, 3, 4, or 6. You're not going to ever see a 5. And if you have a look at the ones that exist on trade, all of the ones that have +5 to the level of fire skills do not have 20% fire quality on them. So on average, getting this perfect Fireflower roll is going to take you 1,440 Zoph's Catalysts, 72 clean Fireflowers, aka uncorrupted ones, and 72 copies of whichever anointment you deem appropriate to use on your Fireflower Amulet. 25% mana regen rate is a super cheap option that you could apply. That uses 2 Distilled Guilt and 1 Distilled Ire, which is only going to cost you about 3 Chaos every time that you apply it. So that's one that you could consider. There are, of course, many other options. Now your +4s, the one that fail but that actually roll a +4, these might be of interest to other players. And on average, you can get 3.1 of these for every +6 that you get. Now it's worth noting, of course, that if you start with +4 ones that are clean, i.e. not corrupted, then a lot more of the outputs will end up being +4, but +4 clean Fireflowers are pretty expensive. They're at least a Divine Orb, often more, and as a result, you might find that's not economical. I'll leave the exact numbers on that up to you. If you decide to go ahead with this project, you're no more likely to end up with a +6 that way, but you will end up with a number of +4s that have useful enchantments on them, and that might end up being something that's worth your while. +3s, unfortunately, they just don't really sell. You might recover 65% of your costs on +3s, but that's going to be it. So on average, if you make 720 of these Fireflowers, then of that 720, 10 of them would be +6s, 31 of them would be +4s, and all the rest would either be lower than +4, or they'd be whatever they were before they were corrupted, if they didn't end up Krangledivining. Anyway, that is the exhaustive guide to Vaal Orbs. I will put a link down in the description below to 2 different write-ups of this video. So the factual information in this, minus any of the strategic commentary, that's all on POE2wiki.net, which is a great source of factual information. It's kind of the closest thing to a Path of Exile 2 encyclopedia that exists. I was a part of working some of that out, although a lot of the work on that was done by other people. But I also did a write-up for gaming strategy site Mobalytics that also goes into some of the strategic things, such as this is the reasons you should Vaal Waystones, these are some of the benefits for doing so, and I'll put a link to that version of the guide down in the description below. The Mobalytics version has the same information as this video, but it's a bit easier for me to update in the future if Grinding Gear Games make changes to the way Vaal Orbs work then. Anyways, I'm going to leave it there. May your Vaal Orbs have interesting results, some of which make you jump with joy, and some of which make you rage log out of the game for the rest of the night.